What happens when a woman holds the world in her hands only for history to erase her grip? What does it take for a queen to save an empire, and what is the cost when her name is whispered away by time? We remember the emperors, the generals, the men who carved their names on stone and in blood. But what about the empresses who ruled from behind the throne, or sometimes from the throne itself? What about the mother who governed for a decade while her son was at war, only to be written out of his story? What about the sisters born in a special purple room, destined to rule, who held the fate of Constantinople in their hands before fading into footnotes? Their stories are not just about survival. They are about power, faith, politics, and the silent strength that held a 1,000-year empire together. Number 16, was she the last true Roman? Helena Dragas was born around 1372, not in Constantinople, but in the crumbling Serbian state. Her father was a local lord, a man trying to hold his small piece of the world together as the Ottoman Empire swallowed everything around them. By the time she died in 1450, just 3 years before the fall of Constantinople, she was the revered empress mother, a nun named Hypomone, which means patiences. She saw the Byzantine Empire shrink from a world power to just a city and its suburbs. She outlived her husband, Emperor Manuel II Palaeologos, by 25 years. And she was the mother of the last two Roman emperors, John V and Constantine XI. Helena's marriage was purely political. In 1392, she was sent to Constantinople to marry Manuel II. The empire was a shadow of its former self. It was a vassal state of the Ottomans. The emperor had to beg for permission to repair his own city walls. Helena walked into a court defined by despair. The glory was gone. The money was gone. All that was left was the history, the titles, and the crushing weight of expectation. She was expected to provide heirs. She did. She gave the empire 8 children, including 6 sons. This was her first and most crucial duty. But Helena was more than a mother. She became the stable center of a frantic and dying world. Her husband, Manuel II, was a brilliant diplomat and scholar. He spent years traveling in Western Europe, from Paris to London, trying to beg for a new crusade, for soldiers, for money to fight the Ottomans. While he was gone, who ran the city? Officially, their young son, John. But in reality, it was Helena. She managed the palace, handled the endless disputes between nobles, and kept the government functioning. She learned politics in the most difficult school imaginable, the court of a failed state. Her relationship with her sons was everything. After Manuel II died, her eldest son, John VE, became emperor. He was a tragic figure. He spent his reign desperately trying to save the empire by uniting the Orthodox and Catholic churches. He believed this was the only way to get military aid from the West. He traveled to Italy for the Council of Florence in 1439 and signed the Union. To the people of Constantinople, this was a betrayal of their faith. They rioted. They called him a heretic. Throughout this turmoil, Helena was his closest advisor. She was known for her wisdom and her calm demeanor. She urged caution. She understood the people better than her son did. She knew that forcing the union would break the city's spirit. But John was desperate. When John V died without a child, the succession was a crisis. 2 of his brothers, Constantine and Demetrios, were ready to fight a civil war over the throne. A civil war would have been the final nail in the coffin. The Ottoman Sultan was just waiting for an excuse to attack. It was Helena who stepped in. As Empress Mother, she had immense moral authority. She declared that Constantine, the governor of a small Byzantine territory in Greece, was the rightful heir. She made it happen. She forced Demetrios to stand down. She effectively crowned her son, Constantine XI, the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire. It was her last great political act. After securing the throne for Constantine, she retired to a monastery, as many empresses did in their old age. She took the name Hypomone, patience. It was a fitting name for a woman who had spent her entire life patiently navigating an impossible situation. She died in 1450. She was spared the horror of seeing the final siege in 1453, the fall of the city she had called home for nearly 60 years. She did not have to see her son Constantine XI die fighting on the walls. Why is she forgotten? Because she is a figure of the end times. This history focuses on the dramatic fall of the city and the heroic last stand of her son. Helena's power was quiet. It was the power of influence, of wisdom, of being the bedrock for her family and her dying empire. She was not a warrior queen or a political schemer. She was a manager, a diplomat, a mother, and in the end, the woman who chose the last man to ever call himself a Roman emperor. She was a queen of a city of ghosts, holding things together with patience and will until the very end. At number 15, could a foreigner ever truly rule? She arrived in Constantinople in 1316 as a stranger named Anna of Savoy. She left it decades later, a broken woman, having presided over a civil war that tore the empire apart. She was the regent of the Byzantine Empire for 6 years, from 1341 to 1347. During that time, she made a decision that cost the empire its entire treasury. She pawned the Byzantine crown jewels to the Republic of Venice for 30,000 ducats. The jewels were never redeemed. Anna was a Westerner, a Catholic, from the House of Savoy in what is now part of France and Italy. Her marriage to Emperor Andronikos III Palaiologos was meant to build bridges with the West. When she arrived, she was just a teenager. She converted to Orthodoxy and took the name Anna, but she never quite fit in. The Byzantine court was ancient, formal, and suspicious of outsiders. They called her the Latin. For years, her life was typical for an empress. She had children, including the heir, John V. Her husband, Andronikos III, was a capable but reckless emperor. When he died suddenly in 1341, everything fell apart. Her son, John V, was only 9 years old. Anna was declared regent. This was her moment. She was now the most powerful person in the empire, but she was unprepared. The problem was a man named John Cantacuzenos. He was Andronikos III's best friend and chief minister. He was a brilliant general and administrator. He believed he should be the regent. A powerful faction at court, led by a shadowy figure named Alexios Apokaukos, convinced Empress Anna that Cantacuzenos wanted to steal the throne from her son. They played on her fears as a mother and her insecurity as a foreigner. She believed them. She declared Cantacuzenos an enemy of the state. In response, Cantacuzenos had himself declared emperor in the provinces. A brutal civil war began. This war was a disaster. It was not just Byzantines fighting Byzantines. Both sides hired mercenaries, Anna's side allied with the Serbs and Bulgarians. Cantacuzenos made a fateful alliance with the Ottoman Turks, giving them their first major foothold in Europe. The war destroyed the Byzantine countryside. It bankrupted the state. This is when Anna made her desperate move. To pay for the war, she sent the imperial regalia, including crowns and necklaces heavy with pearls and gems, to Venice as collateral for a loan. It was a sign of absolute desperation. The treasury was empty. Anna tried to rule from Constantinople. She trusted Apokaukos, who became a virtual dictator in the city. He launched a reign of terror against the supporters of Cantacuzenos. But Anna was losing the war. Her allies were unreliable. Cantacuzenos, with his Ottoman troops, was slowly winning. In 1345, Apokaukos was murdered by political prisoners. Anna's government began to crumble. By 1347, it was over. John Cantacuzenos entered Constantinople, but he did not depose Anna's son. A deal was made. Cantacuzenos would rule as senior emperor for 10 years, and then he and John V would rule together. Anna's regency was finished. She was forced to live in the city, essentially under house arrest. She had lost. Her attempts to protect her son's inheritance had nearly destroyed it. She lived for another decade, watching as the man she fought against ruled the empire. The civil war she participated in had weakened the empire so much that it could never recover. It accelerated the rise of the Serbs and, most importantly, the Ottomans. Her decision to pawn the crown jewels was a humiliation from which the empire's prestige never recovered. She is forgotten because her story is one of failure. She was a foreign empress who was manipulated by ambitious men. She made disastrous decisions under immense pressure. She was a mother trying to protect her son, but her actions helped ensure that his empire would be little more than a city waiting for its final fall. Number 14, how do you hold power when your husband is a fool? Euphrosyne Doukaina Kamatera was the empress consort of Alexios III Angelos, who reigned from 1195 to 1203. She was a brilliant and ruthless politician. Her husband was not. He was lazy, extravagant, and interested only in hunting and feasting. While he wasted the empire's money, Euphrosyne essentially ran the government. She appointed ministers, handled petitions, and tried to stop the rampant corruption that was rotting the state from within. But she was accused of having an affair with one of her ministers. Her husband, in a rare moment of action, had her lover executed, and Euphrosyne was banished to a monastery in 1196. The government immediately fell into chaos without her. 6 months later, her husband begged her to come back. She did. Euphrosyne was born into a high-ranking bureaucratic family. She was known for her intelligence and her ambition. She married Alexios Angelos long before he became emperor. In 1195, Alexios overthrew his own brother, Isaac II Angelos. Isaac was blinded and thrown in prison. Alexios III took the throne, but he had no interest in the actual job of being emperor. That fell to Euphrosyne. She was the real power. The historian Nicetas Choniates, who knew her personally, describes her as a commanding woman who could handle the complexities of the state. She understood money, law, and diplomacy. She tried to clamp down on the corrupt officials and nobles who were selling off government offices and bleeding the treasury dry. But she made powerful enemies. The other nobles resented her power. Her own relatives were some of the worst offenders, and she often protected them, which undermined her own reforms. Her personal life became a political weapon. Her enemies whispered that she was having an affair with a minister named Vatatzes. Whether it was true or not is impossible to know, but the accusation was enough. It was a way to attack her power. Emperor Alexios III, perhaps stirred by his own jealousy or pressured by Euphrosyne's enemies, acted decisively for once. Vatatzes was killed. Euphrosyne was stripped of her imperial robes and sent to a convent. The result was immediate. The government, without her steady hand, collapsed into infighting and incompetence. The corruption got worse. Alexios III was incapable of controlling his own court. After about 6 months, a delegation of officials went to the emperor and told him that the empire needed her back. He relented. Euphrosyne returned to the palace and to power, but the damage was done. The empire was weak, divided, and broke. And a storm was coming from the west. In 1203, the Fourth Crusade arrived at Constantinople. They were not there to fight for the Holy Land. They were there to restore the blinded Isaac II and his son, also named Alexios. They had been promised a huge payment for their help. Euphrosyne's husband, Alexios III, was a coward. He made one half-hearted attempt to fight the Crusaders. When it failed, he gathered up as much gold as he could find in the treasury, abandoned his wife and his daughters, and fled the city in the middle of the night. He left Euphrosyne to face the consequences. The Crusaders took the city. They put the blind Isaac II and his son, Alexios IV, on the throne. Euphrosyne was arrested. A few months later, Alexios IV couldn't pay the Crusaders. The city erupted in chaos. The Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204, one of the great catastrophes of medieval history. The Byzantine Empire was shattered. Euphrosyne's story is a tragedy of wasted talent. She was a capable ruler trapped in a partnership with an incompetent man. She tried to hold the empire together, but she was working against her own husband and a deeply corrupt system. She is forgotten because her reign ended in the single greatest disaster in Byzantine history, the Fourth Crusade. Her efforts were washed away in the tide of that catastrophe. She was the smart, capable woman who saw the iceberg coming, but the captain of the ship was a fool who had locked himself in his cabin. Number 13. Can a woman's intelligence survive a court of warriors? Irene Doukaina was the wife of Alexios, I Komnenos, the emperor who saved Byzantium from collapse in the late 11th century. She was born in 1066. She was a quiet, scholarly woman who preferred reading religious texts to engaging in court politics. Her own mother-in-law, the formidable Anna Damascene, despised her and tried to get Alexios to divorce her. For most of her husband's long reign, from 1081 to 1118, Irene was kept in the background. But she was the mother of the next emperor, John II, and a famous historian, her daughter Anna Komnene. Her daughter wrote that Irene's face was like a serene garden in bloom. Irene came from the powerful Doukas family. Her marriage to Alexios was a political alliance meant to unite the Komnenos and Doukas clans, but Alexios's mother, Anna Dalasine, hated the Doukas family. She had her own candidate for empress at the coronation ceremony. Anna Dalasine tried to prevent Irene from being crowned. Alexios had to physically place the crown on Irene's head himself. It was a humiliating start to her reign. For years, Irene lived in the shadow of her mother-in-law. Anna Dalasine was the real power behind the throne for the first decade of Alexios's rule. She ran the palace and the government while Alexios was away on endless military campaigns. Irene was confined to the women's quarters, the gynecium. She focused on raising her children. She had 9 of them. She was not a political player in the same way as other empresses. She was not a schemer. Her influence was subtle and personal. She was known for her piety and her charity. She funded monasteries and hospitals. She was a patron of scholars and artists. She created a court environment that valued culture and learning, a soft power that balanced the harsh military focus of her husband's reign. Her relationship with her husband was complex. In the early years, it was strained, but over time, it seems to have grown into a deep affection. Alexios was constantly on the move, fighting Normans, Pechenegs, and Turks. When he was in the city, he relied on her. In his later years, he suffered from a painful case of gout. Irene nursed him personally. She was his constant companion. The end of Alexios' reign was marked by a bitter succession struggle. Irene and her brilliant daughter Anna Komnene favored Anna's husband Nikephoros Bryennios to be the next emperor. They believed he was more capable than their son John. They plotted to sideline John. On his deathbed, Alexios was caught in the middle. According to some accounts, as Irene pleaded for him to choose Nikephoros, Alexios secretly passed the imperial signet ring to John, who then snuck out of the palace and secured the loyalty of the palace guard. When Alexios died, John was already emperor. Irene was devastated. She felt betrayed by her son and by her husband's final act. She and Anna tried to organize a plot against John II. The plot failed. John was merciful. Instead of punishing them harshly, he simply confiscated some of their property and left them in a monastery they had founded. Irene spent the rest of her life at the Keteridamene convent. It was a place she had designed and funded. Here, she was in her element. She created a community for women dedicated to prayer, charity, and scholarship. She presided over a small court of intellectuals. Her daughter, Anna Komnene, wrote her famous history, the Alexiad, in this convent. It is one of the most important sources for the period. Irene Doukaina is forgotten because she was not a typical empress. Her power was not political. It was cultural and familial. She lost the great political battle of her life, the succession of her husband. But her legacy is quiet and enduring. She was the anchor of a famous family. She fostered a culture of learning that produced one of the greatest female historians of all time. She represents a different kind of power, the power to nurture, to build institutions, and to shape the culture of an age, even when excluded from the halls of government. Number 12, what if your mother was a better ruler than you? Anna Dalasine never held the title of reigning empress, but for about a decade she ruled the Byzantine Empire. She was the mother of Emperor Alexios I. In 1081, shortly after her son took the throne, he issued a special decree, a crucible. This document gave his mother almost unlimited power. She had the authority to run the entire civil administration of the empire while Alexios was away fighting. She could sign documents, appoint officials, and manage the treasury. She was the CEO of Byzantium, and her son was the commander-in-chief. She ran the empire from a convent, not the great palace. Anna Dalasine was born around 1025 into a family with deep military and aristocratic roots. She married John Komnenos, the brother of an emperor. She was fiercely ambitious, not for herself, but for her family. She had 8 children, and she was determined to see them on the throne. She was a master of political intrigue. She spent decades building a network of alliances through the marriages of her children. She created a powerful clan, the Komnenoi, that would dominate Byzantine politics for over a century. Her moment came in 1081. The empire was in a state of near total collapse. The Turks had conquered most of Anatolia, the heartland of the empire. The Normans were invading from the west. The treasury was empty. The army was a collection of mercenaries. It was in this chaos that her third son, Alexios, seized the throne. He was a brilliant general, but he needed to be on the battlefield, not in Constantinople. That's where Anna came in. Alexios trusted his mother completely. He knew she was as cunning and dedicated as he was. So he made her his co-ruler in all but name. Her official residence was a monastery, but from there she directed the entire bureaucracy. She worked tirelessly. She received reports from generals, managed tax collection, and presided over law courts. She was known for her strict piety and her austere lifestyle. She demanded the same dedication from everyone who worked for her. She was respected but also feared. She was also a ruthless family manager. She controlled every aspect of her children's lives. As we saw, she clashed bitterly with her daughter-in-law, Empress Irene Doukaina. Anna saw Irene as a representative of a rival clan, the Doukai, and never fully trusted her. She tried to dominate the imperial household, pushing Irene to the side. This caused immense tension within the family. Her de facto reign lasted for about 10 years, as Alexios stabilized the frontiers and his own rule became more secure. He began to spend more time in the capital. Anna's direct influence began to wane. The crucible was never revoked, but its practical power diminished. Around 1095, she retired fully to a monastery she had founded. She had accomplished her life's goal. She had put her family on the throne and helped them save the empire from destruction. She died around 1102. Anna Damascene is one of the most powerful women in Byzantine history, yet she is almost completely unknown to the general public. Why? Because she never wore the crown herself. She was the matriarch, the power behind the throne. Her story is buried in the history of her famous son. The histories written by people like her granddaughter Anna Komnene focus on the emperor, but Alexios' success would have been impossible without his mother running the state for him. She was the foundation upon which the Komnenian restoration was built. She was the unelected, uncrowned empress who governed an empire from her monastic cell. Number 11. Could a scholar effectively rule an army? Eudokia Macromboletissa was the empress of two different emperors, and for 7 months in 1067 she was the sole ruler and regent of the Byzantine Empire. She was a scholar and a writer, a niece of one of the most important patriarchs of Constantinople. On his deathbed, her first husband, Emperor Constantine X Ducas, made her swear an oath that she would never remarry. He wanted to protect the throne for their young sons. Eudokia swore the oath. Then, facing a military crisis that threatened to destroy the empire, she broke it. Eudokia was born around 1021. She was known for her intelligence and education. She compiled a dictionary of history and mythology. She was not a typical court lady. She was an intellectual. She married Constantine Doukas, and when he became emperor in 1059, she became empress. His reign was a disaster. He was a bureaucrat, not a soldier. He gutted the army to save money. He neglected the frontiers. When he died in 1067, he left Eudokia with a terrible inheritance, young sons, an empty treasury, and enemies pressing in on all sides. The Seljuk Turks were raiding deep into Anatolia. Eudokia was now regent. She was in an impossible position. The oath she had sworn prevented her from marrying a general who could lead the army. The bureaucracy supported her, but the military leaders despised the weak Doukas regime. They knew the empire needed a soldier at its head. Eudokia knew it too. She had to find a way to break her oath without looking like an oath breaker. She devised a clever plan. She secretly approached the patriarch, John Xiphilinos. She told him that she had fallen in love with one of his relatives. She said she wanted to marry him. This would be a way to break the oath, but for a private, not a political reason. The patriarch, perhaps flattered, agreed to help. He publicly absolved her of her oath, but Eudokia had no intention of marrying his relative. Her real target was a handsome and popular general named Romanos Diogenes. He was a captive in the palace, accused of treason. Eudokia had him brought before her, pardoned him, and within a short time married him. On January 1st, 1068, Romanos IV Diogenes was crowned emperor. It was a brilliant political maneuver. Eudokia had secured a military man to defend the empire while technically preserving the rights of her sons, who were crowned as co-emperors. But her plan had a fatal flaw. She had chosen a husband, but she had not chosen a man who would be content to be her subordinate. Romanos was an emperor now. He took command of the army and marched east to fight the Turks. He left Eudokia in charge of the government in Constantinople, but he didn't trust her. He particularly distrusted the powerful Doukas family, especially the Caesar John Doukas, her brother-in-law. The court was divided between the supporters of Romanos and the supporters of the Doukas boys. The climax of this story came in 1071. Romanos IV led a huge army into eastern Anatolia. At the Battle of Manzikert, the Byzantine army was annihilated by the Seljuk Turks. Romanos himself was captured. It was one of the worst military disasters in Byzantine history. News of the defeat reached Constantinople. The Doukas faction, led by the Caesar John, saw their chance. They staged a coup. They declared Eudokia's regency was over. Her eldest son, Michael VII, was now the sole emperor. Eudokia was arrested and forced to become a nun. She was sent to a monastery. Her political career was over. Romanos was eventually released by the Turks. He tried to reclaim his throne, but he was defeated in a short civil war, captured, and blinded by the Doukas family. He died shortly after from his wounds. Eudokia Macrembolitissa is a forgotten queen because she was ultimately outmaneuvered. Her clever plan to save the empire backfired. She brought a man to power who she could not control, and his defeat led to her own downfall and a catastrophe for the empire. She was a scholar and a politician, not a general. She understood the needs of the state, but she was caught between the powerful forces of the bureaucracy and the military. She tried to bridge that gap with her marriage, but the bridge collapsed and took her and the empire down with it. Number 10, how many husbands does it take to keep a crown? Zoe Porphyrogenita was born in a special chamber of the Great Palace lined with purple stone. This made her Porphyrogenita, born in the purple, a true heir of the Macedonian dynasty. She was 50 years old when she finally came to power. She ruled the Byzantine Empire in her own right for a few months in 1042, and as a powerful empress consort for 22 years. She had 3 husbands, all of whom she made emperor. She adopted a son and then had him deposed and blinded. She was one of the great survivors of Byzantine history. Her personal life was the politics of the empire. Zoe was born around 978. She was the daughter of Emperor Constantine V. Her father had no sons. For decades, Zoe and her sister Theodora lived in seclusion in the palace. They were imperial princesses, but they were kept away from power. Their father didn't even bother to find them husbands until he was on his deathbed. In 1028, he chose a man named Romanos Argyros to marry one of them. Theodora refused, so the 50-year-old Zoe was married to the 60-year-old Romanos. 3 days later, her father died, and Romanos III became emperor. Zoe was now empress. But her marriage was not happy. They had no children. Romanos was vain and incompetent. Zoe took a lover, a handsome young court official named Michael. He was of low birth, but Zoe was infatuated. In 1034, Romanos III was found dead in his bath. The circumstances were suspicious. Almost immediately, Zoe married Michael. He was crowned emperor Michael IV. Michael IV was a much better ruler than Romanos. But he was an epileptic and his health was poor. The real power behind the throne was his brother, a brilliant but ruthless eunuch named John the Orphanatrophos. And John ran the state. He also kept a close watch on Zoe. He knew her power came from her legitimacy as a Porphyrogenita princess. He sidelined her, keeping her confined to the women's quarters. When Michael IV was dying in 1041, John the Orphanatrophos persuaded Zoe to adopt his nephew, also named Michael, as her son. When Michael IV died, this nephew became Emperor Michael Vit. He was arrogant and ungrateful. He owed his throne to Zoe, but he resented her. In a foolish move, he had Zoe arrested and exiled to a monastery on an island. This was a huge mistake. The people of Constantinople adored Zoe. She was the born in the purple princess, the living link to the great Macedonian dynasty. When they heard she had been exiled, the city erupted into a massive riot. A mob stormed the palace, demanding their empress back. The historian Michael Sellos gives a vivid account of the chaos. The palace guard was overwhelmed. Michael V was forced to bring Zoe back. But it was too late. The mob was not satisfied. This is when Zoe's reclusive sister Theodora was brought out of her convent. The people wanted the two sisters to rule together. The mob found Michael V, dragged him out of a church where he was hiding, and blinded him. For a few months in 1042, Zoe and her sister Theodora reigned as co-empresses. It was the first and only time two women officially ruled the empire together. But they did not get along. Zoe was extravagant and loved the glamour of the court. Theodora was austere and reclusive. The government was paralyzed by their disagreements. The court decided a man was needed to run the state. Zoe had to marry again. Her third husband was Constantine Monomachos, a nobleman she had been exiled for having an affair with years earlier. He became Emperor Constantine IX. Zoe lived out the rest of her life as Empress Consort. She was still a powerful figure, but the day-to-day rule was in her husband's hands. She died in 1050 at the age of 72. Zoe is forgotten, or remembered as a scandalous figure, because her life reads like a soap opera. But she was much more than that. In an age when women were supposed to be silent and obedient, she was a kingmaker. Her legitimacy was the source of all political power for over 2 decades. Emperors rose and fell based on their relationship with her. She was not a great administrator or general. Her power was her bloodline, and she used it with a survivor's instinct to navigate the most dangerous court in the world for over 20 years. Number 9. What happens when you're born to rule but have to wait a lifetime? Theodora Porphyrogenita was the younger sister of Zoe. Like her sister, she was born in the purple. But while Zoe loved the public stage, Theodora was a quiet, severe woman who preferred a life of religious devotion. She was forced into politics against her will. She co-ruled with her sister for a few months in 1042. Then, in 1055, at the age of 75, she became the sole ruler of the Byzantine Empire. She was the last of the great Macedonian dynasty, which had ruled for nearly 200 years. She refused to marry. Theodora was born in 984. She spent most of her life in the shadows. Her father, Constantine V, considered her as a potential bride for the Holy Roman Emperor, but she refused. When her father was dying, he wanted her to marry his chosen heir, Romanos Argyros. She refused again, a stunning act of defiance. This forced her older sister Zoe into the marriage. During the reigns of Zoe's first 2 husbands, Romanos III and Michael IV, Theodora lived quietly in the palace. But she was always seen as a potential rival. Empress Zoe was jealous of her younger and apparently more attractive sister. In 1034, Theodora was accused of plotting against the emperor. She was confined to a monastery. She spent years there, living as a nun. Her moment came during the popular uprising of 1042 against Michael V. The people, furious that Zoe had been exiled, demanded that her sister Theodora be brought back as well. A delegation went to her monastery. Theodora refused to leave. She had accepted her life as a nun. The delegation had to physically drag her out of the convent, exchange her nun's habit for imperial robes, and proclaim her empress alongside her sister. The joint rule of the sisters was not a success. Their personalities were too different. Theodora was grim and businesslike. Zoe was flighty and generous to her favorites. After a few months, Zoe married Constantine IX Monomachos, and Theodora once again faded into the background. She lived in the palace, holding the title of empress, but with no real power. Then, in 1055, Constantine IX died. He had no sons. The courtiers gathered around the dying emperor's bed, trying to decide who should succeed him. But the imperial guard took matters into their own hands. They went to Theodora's quarters. She was now 75 years old. They proclaimed her the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. Her short reign, from 1055 to 1056, was surprisingly effective. She was an old woman, but she was sharp and decisive. She took control of the government herself. She did not delegate. She presided over the Senate and the law courts. She appointed her own ministers, choosing capable men instead of corrupt court favorites. She clamped down on the sale of offices. She was firm and just... The historian Michael Psellos, who served in her government, was impressed by her command of state affairs, even if he found her personality harsh. The most important issue was the succession. She was old and had no children. The court and the patriarch urged her to marry to ensure a stable transition. Theodora flatly refused. She had refused to marry as a young woman, and she would not marry now. She would rule alone. As her health failed in 1056, she was finally persuaded to name a successor. On her deathbed, she chose an elderly bureaucrat named Michael Bringas. It was a poor choice. He was not a strong leader. Theodora died a few days later. With her death, the Macedonian dynasty, which had produced some of the greatest emperors in Byzantine history, came to an end. Her successor lasted only a year before he was overthrown by a military revolt. Theodora is a forgotten queen because she was an anomaly. She ruled for a very short time at the very end of her life. Her reign was a brief, stable interlude in a period of growing chaos. But, her story is remarkable. She was a woman who never wanted power, who had it forced upon her, and who, at an advanced age, proved to be a more capable and conscientious ruler than many of the men who had preceded her. She was the reluctant empress, the last branch of a mighty tree. Number 8, can you restore an empire by breaking all the rules? Theodora, the wife of Emperor Theophilos, was a secret icon worshipper. Her husband was a fervent iconoclast, a man who persecuted those who venerated religious images. For his entire reign, from 829 to 842, Theodora had to hide her beliefs. She kept icons hidden in her rooms in the Great Palace. After her husband died, she became regent for her young son, Michael III. Her first major act, she overturned her husband's religious policy. In 843, she called a council that officially restored the veneration of icons for good. This event is still celebrated in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the Triumph of Orthodoxy. She ruled as regent for 13 years. Theodora was born around 815 in Paphlagonia on the Black Sea coast. She was chosen as a bride for the young Emperor Theophilos in an imperial bride show, a strange Byzantine custom where eligible noble women were paraded before the emperor. The story goes that Theophilos was about to choose another woman, but made a clumsy remark. He then turned to the beautiful and modest Theodora and gave her the golden apple, signifying his choice. Their marriage was a good one, except for the massive religious disagreement. The Byzantine Empire had been torn apart for over a century by the iconoclast controversy. Iconoclasts believed that venerating images was idolatry. Iconojewels or iconophiles believed that icons were a vital part of Christian worship. Theophilos was a passionate iconoclast. He arrested, imprisoned, and sometimes tortured those who kept icons. Theodora had to be careful. There are stories of her secretly teaching her daughters to venerate icons and of a court jester almost revealing her secret to the emperor. She walked a tightrope, being a loyal wife while holding on to her forbidden faith. When Theophilos died in 842, their son Michael III was only 2 years old. Theodora became regent. She didn't waste any time. She had the support of powerful officials who were also secret iconojewels. Within a year, the iconoclast patriarch was deposed, and a new iconojewel patriarch was appointed. A church council was held. Iconoclasm was declared a heresy. On the first Sunday of Lent in 843, a great procession was held in Constantinople, with clergy and courtiers carrying icons to the Hagia Sophia. It was a moment of profound change. Theodora had ended a religious conflict that had defined Byzantine life for 120 years. As a ruler, Theodora was very capable. She ran a stable and effective government. She was careful with money and replenished the imperial treasury. Her generals won several important victories against the Arabs on the eastern frontier. Her government sent the famous missionaries Cyril and Methodius to the Slavs, a hugely important event in the history of Eastern Europe. For 13 years, the empire was well managed and secure, but her success created enemies. Her own brother, Bardas, was a brilliant but ambitious man. As her son Michael III grew older, Bardas began to plot against Theodora. He encouraged the young emperor to resent his mother's authority. He fueled Michael's interest in chariot racing and drinking, distracting him from his duties. In 855, Bardas and Michael staged a palace coup. They accused Theodora of plotting to keep the throne for herself. She was forced to retire to a monastery. Her powerful minister Theoctistos was murdered. Theodora's regency was over. She had ruled wisely for over a decade, only to be pushed aside by her own son and brother. She lived the rest of her life as a nun. Her son, Michael III, became known as Michael the Drunkard. His reign, under the influence of Bardas and later a court favorite named Basil, was erratic. Eventually, Basil murdered both Bardas and Michael III and seized the throne for himself, founding the Macedonian dynasty. Theodora is remembered in the Orthodox Church as a saint for restoring the icons. But as a political figure, she is often forgotten, overshadowed by the dramatic and sordid end of her son's reign. Her 13 years of stable, successful rule are a mere preface to the story of the next dynasty. But she was one of the most consequential regents in Byzantine history. She ended a century of religious strife and left the empire stronger and richer than she found it. She was a ruler of quiet conviction who changed the course of her empire's faith. Number 7 was a mother's ambition worth her son's sight. Irene of Athens was the first woman in European history to rule an empire in her own right. She did not call herself empress or basilissa. She used the male title Basilius, or emperor. She ruled from 797 to 802. She was a brilliant, determined, and ruthless politician. And to secure her throne, she had her own son, the Emperor Constantine VI, arrested and blinded in the very room where she had given birth to him. Her actions were so shocking that in the West, Pope Leo III considered the Roman throne in Constantinople to be vacant. This led him on Christmas Day in the year 800 to crown the Frankish king Charlemagne as the new Roman emperor, creating a political rivalry that would last for centuries. Irene was born in Athens around 752. She was an orphan from a noble family, known for her stunning beauty. In 769, she was chosen to be the wife of the heir to the throne, Leo IV. She moved to Constantinople, a city torn by the iconoclast controversy. Like Theodora, a generation later, Irene was a secret iconojewel in a fiercely iconoclast court. When her husband became emperor, she had to hide her beliefs. When their son Constantine Phi was born, she was the mother of the heir. Her position was secure. But in 780, Leo IV died. Constantine VI was only 9 years old. Irene became regent. From the start, she faced plots. Her husband's half-brothers tried to seize the throne. Irene acted decisively. She had them tonsured, their heads shaved like monks, and forced into the clergy, disqualifying them from ruling. She then turned to the great religious question of the day. Her goal was to restore the veneration of icons. It was a risky political move. The army was staunchly iconoclast, loyal to the memory of the great warrior emperors who had banned icons. Her first attempt to call a church council in 786 was broken up by iconoclast soldiers. Irene was clever. She sent those troops to the eastern frontier on the pretext of a war. Then she brought loyal iconodule troops from other parts of the empire to the capital. In 787, she convened the Second Council of Nicaea. The council formally condemned iconoclasm and restored the veneration of icons. It was a huge political and religious victory. As her son Constantine VI grew up, he wanted to rule. He resented his mother's power. A conflict began between mother and son. For a time, the army acclaimed Constantine as the sole ruler, and Irene was placed under house arrest. But Constantine was an immature and ineffective ruler. He led the army to a humiliating defeat against the Bulgarians. He divorced his wife and married his mistress, an act that angered the church. Irene saw her opportunity. She began to plot. She used her son's failures to win back the support of the army and the court. In 797, her conspiracy came to a head. Constantine tried to flee the city, but he was captured and brought back to the palace. A few days later, on Irene's orders, he was blinded. The act was meant to disqualify him from ruling forever. He died shortly after from his injuries. Irene was now the sole ruler, the Basilius of the Romans. As ruler, she pursued a policy of peace. She also tried to shore up her popularity by cutting taxes. This was a bad, long-term decision, as it weakened the state's finances. Her most famous diplomatic move was a potential marriage alliance with Charlemagne, the new emperor in the West. The idea was to unite the two Roman empires. It was an astonishing concept, but it never happened. In 802, her own finance minister, Nikephoros, led a coup against her. The nobles were tired of being ruled by a woman and were worried about the state of the treasury. Irene was deposed and exiled to the island of Lesbos. The new emperor gave her no money. She, who had once commanded the wealth of an empire, was forced to support herself by spinning wool. And she died. A year later. Irene is one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in Byzantine history. She's forgotten because her story is so dark. A mother who mutilated her own son for power is a difficult figure to celebrate. But she was also a master politician who ended the first phase of iconoclasm and ruled an empire alone, something no woman had done before. She broke every rule to get to the top, and her reign, though short, changed the political map of Europe forever. Number 6, could an empress save a doomed dynasty? Sophia was the niece of the famous Empress Theodora, the wife of Justinian the Great. She learned politics at the feet of one of the most powerful women in Byzantine history. When her husband Justin II became emperor in 565, Sophia was determined to be a co-ruler, not just a consort. She had her image put on the coins alongside her husband's. She had a palace named after her. She handled financial matters for the empire. But her husband descended into madness, and when a new emperor was chosen, Sophia tried to cling to power, leading to a dramatic confrontation in the halls of the Great Palace. Sophia was born into the highest level of the Byzantine aristocracy. She was Theodora's niece, which gave her immense prestige. She married Justin, the nephew of Emperor Justinian. They were the obvious heirs, but Justinian lived for a very long time. Sophia and Justin had to wait for decades. When Justinian finally died in 565, they moved quickly to secure the throne. From the beginning, Sophia was an active partner in the government. She was deeply involved in economic policy. One of her first acts was to pay off the state's debts and reform the tax system. She was known to be proud and even arrogant. Unlike her famous aunt, who came from a humble background, Sophia was an aristocrat to her core. But the empire was facing huge problems. In Italy, the Lombards invaded and conquered large parts of the peninsula. On the eastern frontier, a long and costly war with the Sasanian Persian Empire began. The strain of these wars took a toll on her husband, Emperor Justin II. He began to suffer from fits of madness. He would bite his attendants and had to be restrained. During his periods of lucidity, he knew he was losing his mind. With her husband incapacitated, Sophia ran the empire. She negotiated a truce with the Persians. She was the effective ruler, but she knew a permanent solution was needed. In 574, on Justin's advice, she agreed to adopt a successful general named Tiberius as their son and heir. Tiberius was made Caesar, and he took over the day-to-day command of the state. Sophia thought she would be the power behind the new Caesar. She kept control of the imperial treasury. She expected Tiberius to be grateful and subordinate, but Tiberius was his own man. He began to spend the money Sophia had so carefully saved, giving it to the army and the people to win their loyalty. Sophia was furious. When Justin II finally died in 578, Tiberius was set to become the sole emperor. Sophia made a last-ditch effort to keep her power. She offered to marry the new emperor, even though her husband was barely dead. Tiberius politely refused. He was already married. In a tense public ceremony, Sophia passed the imperial crown to Tiberius. But she wasn't done. She began to plot against him. She secretly contacted another general, Justinian, and promised to help him seize the throne. Tiberius discovered the plot. He went to the palace of Sophia, the residence she controlled, and confronted her. He had his soldiers search the palace, and they found a huge stash of gold that she had hidden. Tiberius confiscated her wealth and stripped her of most of her staff. Her power was broken. She was forced to live out the rest of her life in quiet retirement. Sophia's story is that of a woman who tasted absolute power and could not let it go. She was a capable administrator, but her pride and her greed were her undoing. She is forgotten because she stands between two giants, the age of Justinian and Theodora, and the troubled but important reign of Tiberius Constantine. She was the empress who managed a mad emperor's reign, but who failed to control his successor. She was a politician who understood money and power, but who ultimately misjudged the men she tried to manipulate. Number 5, can a commoner become the most powerful woman in the world? Theodora, the wife of Justinian I, was probably the most powerful and influential woman in the history of the Byzantine Empire. She was not born a princess. She was born into the lowest class of Byzantine society. Her father was a bearkeeper for the Hippodrome, the massive chariot racing stadium in Constantinople. She was an actress. In that society, actress was a term for a performer who engaged in mimes and other performances that were considered scandalous. And yet, she rose from this background to become empress. In 532, during the Nika riots, when the city was in flames and the emperor was about to flee, it was Theodora who stood up and convinced him to stay and fight. She saved his throne. She was a champion of women's rights, passing laws that gave women more power in divorce and property ownership. Theodora was born around the year 500. Her early life is described in lurid detail by the historian Procopius in his Secret History. Procopius despised Theodora and Justinian, so his account is likely exaggerated. But even if only a part of it is true, her story is incredible. And she and her sisters were performers from a young age. She was known for her beauty, her intelligence, and her sharp wit. She met Justinian, the nephew and heir of the emperor, sometime in the 520s. He was completely captivated by her. But there was a problem. A law dating from the time of the first Roman emperor forbade a senator from marrying an actress. Justinian was a senator. He couldn't marry her. So he had his uncle, the Emperor Justin I, change the law. In 525, they were married. When Justin died in 527, Justinian became emperor, and Theodora, the former actress, became empress. The old aristocracy in Constantinople was horrified, but Theodora quickly proved she was more than just a beautiful face. She was a tough, intelligent, and ruthless politician. She was her husband's most trusted advisor. He called her his partner in my deliberations. She had her own court, her own staff, and her own network of spies. Her most famous moment came in January 532. A riot broke out in the Hippodrome between the two main chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens. The riot quickly escalated into a full-blown insurrection against Justinian's government. The city burned for days. Large parts of Constantinople, including the original Hagia Sophia, were destroyed. Justinian's generals were unable to stop the rioters. The emperor and his advisors were holed up in the palace, ready to flee by sea. Justinian had a boat ready. His advisors told him it was time to go. Then Theodora spoke. According to Procopius, she gave a short, powerful speech. She said she would not flee. She said that the imperial purple was a noble shroud to be buried in. Her courage shamed the men into action. Justinian ordered his generals Belisarius and Mundus to take their troops into the Hippodrome and crush the rebellion. They did. Tens of thousands of people were killed. The riot was over. Justinian's throne was safe. He owed it to his wife. After the riots, Theodora's influence only grew. She was deeply involved in religious policy. While Justinian was a staunch Orthodox Christian, Theodora was sympathetic to the Monophysites, a Christian group considered heretical by the mainstream church. She used her influence to protect Monophysite leaders from persecution. This created a strange dual policy in the empire, where the emperor would condemn the heretics and the empress would shelter them. She also championed the rights of women. She established a convent for former prostitutes. She pushed for laws that made it illegal to force women into prostitution. She strengthened the rights of women to own and inherit property. She gave mothers more rights over their children. These were revolutionary changes for the time. Theodora died in 548, probably from cancer. Justinian was heartbroken. He never remarried. He outlived her by 17 years, but many historians feel that his reign lost some of its energy and direction after her death. Theodora is not entirely forgotten, but her true role is often underestimated. She is remembered for her scandalous youth or for her speech during the Nika riots. She was much more, she was a co-ruler, a politician of the first rank, a religious patron, and a social reformer. She was the bearkeeper's daughter who became an empress and saved an empire. Her story is one of the most remarkable ascents to power in history. Number 4, how do you hold a dynasty together with only a name? Ariadne was the daughter of an emperor, the wife of 2 emperors, and the mother of another emperor. For over 40 years, from the 470s until her death in 515, she was the constant link to the ruling Theodosian dynasty. Her bloodline provided the legitimacy for a series of rulers who had no claim to the throne themselves. She was a Porphyrogenita born in the purple. In a time of violent coups and political instability, her presence as empress was the one thing that gave the government a sense of continuity. She married a barbarian general and made him emperor. After he was overthrown, she married a quiet old bureaucrat and made him emperor. She was the ultimate kingmaker. Ariadne was born in the 450s. The daughter of Emperor Leo I. Leo was the first of a new dynasty, and he wanted to secure his family's hold on power. He married Ariadne to a man named Zeno. Zeno was not a Roman or a Greek. He was an Isaurian from a rough mountainous region of Anatolia. The traditional Roman aristocracy looked down on him as a barbarian, but he was a tough and capable general. The marriage was a political calculation. It gave Zeno a path to the throne and gave Leo a powerful military ally. When Leo I died in 474, Ariadne's young son, also named Leo, became Emperor Leo II. Zeno ruled as his regent. But the boy died after only a few months. Zeno then became sole emperor, with Ariadne as his empress. His claim to the throne was entirely through her. Zeno's reign was stormy. He was unpopular with the people of Constantinople and with the Roman elite because of his Isaurian origins. There were constant plots against him. In 475, just a year into his reign, a coup led by Ariadne's own mother, Verina, forced Zeno and Ariadne to flee the city. The usurper Basiliscus took the throne, but Basiliscus was incompetent. After 20 months, Zeno and Ariadne returned with an army and reclaimed the capital. Ariadne's presence was crucial. It reminded the people that Zeno the barbarian was married to a true Roman princess. Zeno ruled for another 15 years, a reign filled with rebellions and religious controversies. Ariadne seems to have been a loyal and supportive wife. She was the stable center of a chaotic court. When Zeno died in 491, he had no surviving sons. The empire was faced with a succession crisis. The choice of the next emperor fell to Ariadne. The people of Constantinople gathered in the Hippodrome and chanted, "Give the empire a Roman emperor." They were tired of the Isaurians. Ariadne appeared before the people and promised she would choose a worthy ruler. She chose a man named Anastasius. He was a court official in his early 60s, known for his competence and his quiet dignity. He was a Roman, which pleased the crowd. A few weeks after he was crowned, the 40-year-old Ariadne married the 60-year-old Anastasius. Once again, she had provided the legitimacy for a new emperor. Her marriage to Anastasius bridged the gap between the old regime and the new. Her second marriage seems to have been a respectful partnership. Anastasius proved to be one of the best administrators in Byzantine history. He reformed the currency, cut taxes, and left the empire with a massive treasury surplus. Ariadne continued to be a respected figure at court, the link to the past, the Empress Dowager who had become Empress Consort again. She died in 515. She had been empress for most of her adult life. She had seen emperors rise and fall. She had survived coups and exile. She is forgotten because her power was passive. She was not a ruler in her own right. She was a vessel of legitimacy. Her power was in her blood. But in the unstable and violent world of the 5th century, that was the most important kind of power there was. She was the thread that held the imperial succession together for nearly half a century. Number 3, could a poet survive in a world of political intrigue? Aelia Eudocia was a poet, a scholar, and for a time one of the most powerful women in the early Byzantine Empire. She was not born into the nobility. She was the daughter of a pagan Greek philosopher from Athens. Her name was Athenais. She came to Constantinople as a young woman to petition the court over an inheritance dispute. The emperor's sister Pulcheria was so impressed by her intelligence and beauty that she arranged for Athenais to marry her brother, the Emperor Theodosius II. She converted to Christianity, was renamed Aelia Eudocia, and in 421 she became empress. For 20 years, she was a major patron of art and literature. But she fell from grace in a cloud of scandal and spent the last 2 decades of her life in a kind of gilded exile in Jerusalem. Eudocia's story is remarkable. She grew up in a highly educated pagan household in Athens, a city that was still a center of classical learning. Her father taught her literature and rhetoric. When he died, he left most of his property to his sons, leaving Eudocia only 100 gold coins. He supposedly said that her beauty and education were a sufficient inheritance. Angered by this, she went to the capital to appeal her case. In Constantinople, she came to the attention of Pulcheria, the powerful older sister of the young emperor Theodosius II. Pulcheria was the regent and the real ruler of the empire. She was looking for a wife for her brother, one who would not be too politically ambitious. The brilliant, beautiful, and non-aristocratic Athenais seemed perfect. After her conversion and marriage, Eudocia became a major figure at court. She did not challenge Pulcheria's political power. Instead, she focused on culture. She made the imperial court a center of learning. She surrounded herself with scholars and poets. She was a writer herself. She wrote epic poems on Christian themes using the classical Homeric style. She sponsored the University of Constantinople, making it a rival to the old academies of Athens and Alexandria. She helped create an environment where Christian faith and classical Greek culture could coexist. For about 2 decades, there was a delicate balance of power at the top of the empire. Pulcheria ran the state and the church. Theodosius II, a weak and indecisive emperor, focused on his own hobbies. And Eudocia ran the cultural life of the court, but this balance eventually broke down. Eudocia began to use her influence to promote her own allies. She came into conflict with a powerful eunuch named Chrysafius, who was a rival of Pulcheria. The final break came around 443. The details are murky, recorded only by hostile chroniclers. There was a scandal. Eudocia was accused of having an affair with a high-ranking court official named Paulinus, a childhood friend of the emperor. The story goes that Theodosius gave Eudocia a special apple of enormous size. She, in turn, gave it as a gift to Paulinus, who was ill. And Paulinus, not knowing where the apple came from, thought it was a fine gift for the emperor and gave it to Theodosius. When the emperor saw the apple, he confronted his wife. She denied having given it away. He then produced the apple, proving she had lied. He had Paulinus executed. Eudocia was publicly humiliated. Whether the story is true or a fabrication designed to ruin her, the result was the same. Eudocia lost all her influence at court. She was allowed to retire from the palace and go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. She would never see her husband or Constantinople again. She spent the last 17 years of her life in Jerusalem. She was still wealthy and influential, but her power was local. She sponsored a massive building program, constructing churches, monasteries, and hospices. She got involved in the intense theological disputes of the Holy Land, for a time siding with a faction that was considered heretical. She died in Jerusalem in 460. Eudocia is a forgotten queen because her power was soft and her downfall was complete. She was not a political schemer who lost a power struggle. She was an intellectual who tried to create a space for culture in a world of hard-nosed politics and rigid theology. She is a tragic figure, the pagan philosopher's daughter who rose to be a Roman empress, only to be brought down by the brutal realities of the Byzantine court. Number 2, can a vow of chastity be a political weapon? And Pulcheria was the older sister of Emperor Theodosius II. At the age of 15, in the year 414, she was declared Augusta or Empress and made the regent for her younger brother. To protect herself from being forced into a political marriage and to cement her authority, she took a public vow of virginity. Her two younger sisters followed her lead. This act turned the imperial palace into something like a convent. It also made Pulcheria an untouchable figure, a holy guardian for her brother. For nearly 40 years, she was the most powerful person in the Byzantine Empire. She guided the state through a period of relative peace and stability. She was a major player in the church controversies of her day, helping to define what would become Orthodox Christian doctrine. Pulcheria was born in 399, the daughter of Emperor Arcadius. Her father was a weak ruler. When he died in 408, his son and heir, Theodosius II, was only 7 years old. For the first few years, the empire was run by a powerful official, but in 414, the teenage Pulcheria engineered a political takeover. She sidelined the official and had herself proclaimed regent. Her vow of virginity was a masterstroke of political theater. In a world where royal women were treated as pawns in marriage alliances, Pulcheria declared herself off the board. Her body was not a political asset to be traded. It was consecrated to God. This gave her a unique moral authority. She was not just a regent, she was a quasi-monastic figure, the sacred protector of her brother's throne. She devoted herself to raising and educating Theodosius, ensuring he was a pious, if not a very effective ruler. She dominated the government. She was intelligent, decisive, and deeply pious. She chose the officials who ran the bureaucracy and the generals who led the army. She guided the empire's foreign policy. Her reign as regent was largely peaceful. The massive Theodosian walls of Constantinople, which would protect the city for 1,000 years, were completed under her watch. Her influence was most profound in religious matters. Pulcheria was a devout and uncompromisingly Orthodox Christian. She was a major opponent of a Christian teacher named Nestorius, whose teachings about the nature of Christ were condemned as heresy at the Council of Ephesus in 431. Pulcheria was instrumental in his downfall. Her long dominance of the court was not without challenges. As we saw, her sister-in-law, the Empress Eudocia, became a rival for a time. And in the 440s, the eunuch Chrysotheus gained great influence over her brother Theodosius II and managed to push Pulcheria out of the court. For several years, she lived in retirement. During this time, the empire's religious policy went in a direction she fiercely opposed, favoring a doctrine that would later be condemned. And then in 450, Theodosius II died in a riding accident. He had no son, the throne was vacant, the succession was in crisis. The army and the Senate turned to Pulcheria. At the age of 51, the Virgin Empress, who had ruled for so long from behind the scenes, was now the official head of state. But it was felt that a man was needed to lead the army. So Pulcheria did something extraordinary. She agreed to marry. She chose a well-respected general named Marcian, but she did so on one condition: he had to respect her long-held vow of virginity. He agreed. So Pulcheria, the Augusta, married Marcian and made him Augustus. It was a purely political marriage, a partnership to ensure the stability of the state. Their first major act was to call a new church council, the Council of Chalcedon, in 451. This council, guided by Pulcheria and Marcian, condemned the heresy that had flourished under Chrysotheus and defined the Orthodox position on the nature of Christ. The Chalcedonian definition is still a cornerstone of theology for Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant Christians today. Pulcheria died in 453. She was declared a saint by the Church for her defense of orthodoxy. She is a forgotten queen because her power was exercised in an unusual way. She was a regent, a sister, and a wife in a purely platonic marriage. She never commanded an army or led a coup. Her weapons were piety, intelligence, and an unshakable will. She was the Virgin Empress who ruled the Roman world for 4 decades and shaped the future of Christianity. Number one, what does it mean to be the first? Galla Placidia was not, strictly speaking, an empress of the Byzantine Empire. She was an empress of the Western Roman Empire. But Her life and her power were forged in the courts of both the West and the East. She was born the daughter of a Roman emperor. At the age of 21, she was taken hostage when the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome in 410. She was then forced to marry the Visigothic king. After he was assassinated, she was traded back to the Romans. She was then forced to marry a Roman general. After he died, she fled with her children to Constantinople. From there, with the help of the Eastern Roman army, she returned to the West in 425 and installed her 6-year-old son on the throne. For 12 years, she ruled the Western Roman Empire as regent. She was one of the most remarkable women of the late antique world. Her mausoleum in Ravenna, Italy, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, famous for its stunning mosaics. Galla Placidia was born around 388, the daughter of the great Emperor Theodosius I, the last man to rule a united Roman Empire. She grew up in the imperial courts of Milan and Constantinople. She was a Roman princess of the highest rank. Her life was shattered in 410. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, captured and plundered the city of Rome. Galla Placidia was one of the high-value hostages they took with them. For several years, she was a captive, dragged around Italy and Gaul with the Visigothic army. In 414, in a ceremony that mixed Roman and Gothic traditions, she was married to Alaric's successor, Ataulf. Ataulf dreamed of uniting the Goths and Romans into a new empire. Their marriage was meant to be the symbol of this union. They had a son named Theodosius after his imperial grandfather, but the child died in infancy. Then in 415, Ataulf was murdered by one of his own men. The new Gothic king was hostile to the Romans. He treated Placidia cruelly. Eventually, in 416, in a complex political deal, she was returned to her half-brother, the Western Roman Emperor Honorius, in exchange for a huge shipment of grain. Her brother immediately forced her into another political marriage. In 417, she married a brilliant but ambitious Roman general named Constantius. She was reportedly very unhappy about the marriage, but they had 2 children, a daughter and a son named Valentinian. Constantius was so successful that Honorius made him co-emperor. Galla Placidia was now Augusta, empress, for the first time. But her husband died after only 7 months as emperor. After his death, her relationship with her brother Honorius soured. He was accused of inappropriate affection for her. The political factions in the court of Ravenna turned on her. Fearing for her safety, she fled with her children to Constantinople to the court of her nephew, the Eastern Emperor Theodosius II, and his powerful sister Pulcheria. In 423, Honorius died. A usurper took the throne in the west. This gave Theodosius II and Pulcheria an opportunity. They assembled an army, declared Placidia's young son Valentinian III to be the rightful emperor, and sent an expedition to Italy. The expedition was successful. The usurper was defeated and executed. In 425, the 6-year-old Valentinian III was crowned emperor of the West. His mother, Galla Placidia, was his regent. For the next 12 years, from 425 to 437, Galla Placidia was the ruler of the Western Roman Empire. She governed from the city of Ravenna. It was a time of immense crisis. The empire was crumbling. The Vandals were conquering North Africa, the empire's breadbasket. The Visigoths and Franks were carving out kingdoms in Gaul. Her main challenge was managing the rivalries between her powerful generals, particularly between the great commander Aetius and his rival Bonifacius. Her attempts to play them off against each other led to a civil war that further weakened the state. Despite the political turmoil, her court in Ravenna was a center of Christian art and architecture. She commissioned magnificent churches, decorated with the mosaics that are still famous today. Her personal mausoleum is considered one of the most beautiful examples of early Christian art. Her regency officially ended in 437 when her son came of age. But she remained an influential figure for the rest of her life. She died in Rome in 450. She did not live to see the final collapse of the Western Empire, which happened just 26 years later. Galla Placidia is often forgotten or simply remembered as the patron of the famous mausoleum. But she was a pivotal figure in the history of the 5th century. Her life was a catalog of the traumas of a collapsing empire, She was a hostage, a war bride, a political exile, and finally, a ruler. She was a survivor who navigated a brutal and chaotic world with intelligence and determination. She was the last great empress of the West, a Roman princess who held the world together as it was falling apart.